watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's top stories. Future movement leader Saad Hariri hails Lebanese-Saudi relations, stressing that the ties between the two will not be affected by attempts of some parties to harm them. Dozens killed as the Syrian government increases the pressure on rebel-held Aleppo in Syria by stepping up the air assault on the city. And police say that the suspect in a fatal shooting of 5 people at Washington State Mall is taken into custody. Good afternoon to all of those tuning in. Future movement leader Saad Hariri has returned to Beirut from a several-week foreign trip during which he shuttled between Europe and Saudi Arabia. Hariri had hailed the Lebanese-Saudi relations in an interview with the kingdom's official news agency that coincided with the Saudi National Day. He stressed that the ties between the two will not be affected by the attempts of some parties to harm them through insulting the kingdom's role and distorting its reputation over well-known regional calculations. Lebanon has been without a president since the term of Michel Sleiman ended in May 2014, and Hezbollah, MP Michel Aoun's Change and Reform bloc, and some of their allies have been boycotting the parliament's electoral sessions, stripping them of the needed quorum. Hariri, who is close to Saudi Arabia, launched an initiative in late 2015 to nominate Marada movement chief MP Sleiman Frangieh for the presidency, but his proposal was met with reservations from the country's main Christian parties, as well as Hezbollah. The United Arab Emirates says Iran has wasted no time in undermining regional security since it sealed a nuclear deal with world powers last year. UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed told the annual UN gathering of world leaders that against all optimistic expectations, Iran wasted no time in continuing its efforts to undermine the security of the region through aggressive rhetoric, blatant interference, producing and arming militias, developing its ballistic missile program, in addition to its alarming designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. Dozens of people have been killed as the Syrian government increases the pressure on rebel-held Aleppo by stepping up the air assault on the city in the north of the country. Dramatic footage said to be at the aftermath of the bombing has been uploaded to social media websites and shows badly wounded people receiving treatment from medical personnel in the Bustan al-Qasr neighborhood of Aleppo. Rebel officials say heavy air hit at least 4 areas of the opposition-held east, and they believe the strikes are mostly being carried out by Russian warplanes. Residents say airstrikes on eastern Aleppo have been more intense than ever, using more powerful bombs. Russia is guilty of prolonging the war in Syria and may have committed war crimes by targeting an aid convoy. The words of British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson in an interview. He was also asked about the timeline for invoking the formal process for Britain's exit from the European Union. Here's the clip.
Stupendous sums of money which the country can't afford. Putin's regime is not only, as it were, handing Assad the revolver. He is in some instances actually firing the revolver himself. The Russians themselves are actually engaged. They are guilty of protracting this war, of making it far more hideous. And yes, I think that when it comes to instances such as the bombing of civilian targets,
but they don't really care, do they?
We should be looking at whether or not that targeting is done in the knowledge that those are wholly innocent civilian targets. That is a war crime. Obviously, we're not going to do it before Christmas, and I think we've got to do a lot of work to get our ducks in order, and that is going on. But then after that, as the Prime Minister has rightly said, this process probably shouldn't drag.
Coming up next, more world headlines. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Police said at a news conference that the suspect in a fatal shooting of 5 people at Washington State Mall was taken into custody. The suspect, identified by police as Arkan Sitin, 20 years old, has been captured in Oak Harbor. Police say the suspect is believed to have entered the Cascade Mall in Burlington and began shooting at about 7 p.m. local time on Friday in the cosmetics section of a Macy's department store. The rifle was later recovered at the mall, according to Lieutenant Chris Kamek, the commander of the Skagit County Multi-Agency Response Team. 4 women were killed in the rampage. Another man who was shot later died. Authorities offered no information about a possible motive for the attack. An unarmed black man shot and killed by a white police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma was remembered at a funeral service as a father of four with a good heart. The solemn music-filled service at Antioch Baptist Church for Terrence Crutcher, 40 years old, drew hundreds of mourners, many of whom fanned themselves or stood to sing and applaud on a warm evening in North Tulsa. The funeral service came one day after Betty Shelby, the 42-year-old Tulsa police officer who shot Crutcher on September 16, was booked on a first-degree manslaughter charge. She is free on bond and faces at least 4 years in prison if convicted. Tulsa police released two videos on Monday, one from a helicopter and the other from a dashboard camera in a patrol car, which show Crutcher holding his hands in the air shortly before he was shot in the chest next to his vehicle. Police said Crutcher was unarmed and there was no weapon in the vehicle. Charlotte police released body camera and dashboard videos showing the fatal shooting of a black man that triggered protests in the North Carolina city, but the footage did not show whether the victim was holding a gun. A dashboard camera of a police car showed Keith Scott exiting his car and backing away from it. Police shout out to him to drop the gun. Then shots break out and Scott drops to the ground. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Chief Kerr Putney announced the release of the video at an earlier briefing, following days of demonstrations at which protesters demanded that authorities allow the public to see clips of the Tuesday shooting. Putney said before releasing the footage that the videos themselves were insufficient to prove that Scott held a gun, but the totality of evidence did. Police also released pictures including one of a handgun it says was recovered at the scene and an ankle holster police say Scott was wearing. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump told supporters that the country's problems can be solved by tuning out the doubters and naysayers. He was speaking at a campaign rally in Virginia, where he called on supporters to work hard for his campaign during the next few weeks. The rally comes on the same day that the New York Times newspaper endorsed his Democratic rival Hillary Clinton.
Everything broken today can be fixed. All we have to do is tune out the doubters, the cynics, and the naysayers, and there are plenty of them. We are a nation of strivers, dreamers, and believers. And that's the spirit that will carry us to victory in November and to great victories as a nation. We will be respected again as a nation. We'll rebuild this nation, and American energy harvested from American sources will power our nation. American workers will be hired to do the job. We will put new American steel into the spine of our country. I will fight for every neglected part of this nation, and I will fight to bring us all together as one people.
U.S. President Barack Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, as well as the Bushes, officially opened the new Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., before an audience of former presidents and stars, including Oprah Winfrey and Will Smith. They took to the stage thanking their spouses, and the ceremony ended with Obama's standing alone with the Boner family, who included 99-year-old Ruth Boner, the daughter of a slave.
Today, as so many generations have before, we gather on our national mall to tell an essential part of our American story, one that has at times been overlooked. We come not just for today, but for all time. As Americans, we rightfully passed on the tales of the giants who built this country, who led armies into battle, who waged seminal debates in the halls of Congress and the corridors of power. But too often we ignored or forgot the stories of millions upon millions of others. And by knowing this other story, we better understand ourselves and each other. It binds us together. It reaffirms that all of us are American. That African American history is not somehow separate from our larger American story. It's not the underside of the American story. It is central to the American story. That our glory derives not just from our most obvious triumphs, but how we've wrested triumph from tragedy, and how we've been able to remake ourselves again and again and again in accordance with our highest ideals.
Thank you, darling. Laura's been very much engaged in this museum for a long time. She sits on the board, and we're honored to be here. My first reaction is, I hope all our fellow citizens come and look at this place. It is fabulous.
This marks the end of a bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Future movement leader Saad Hariri hails Lebanese-Saudi relations and stresses that the ties between the two will not be affected by attempts of some parties to harm them. Dozens killed as the Syrian government increases the pressure on rebel-held Aleppo by stepping up the air assault on the city. And in the United States, police say that the suspect in a fatal shooting of 5 people has been taken into custody. Those are your Sunday headlines live on Future Television. Have a great week ahead and take care.